Okay, hello? Am I live? Okay, hello. Is this up working for me? Just. Okay. So, hi. My name's Alice Ogorman. I'm from Ireland, and this is my first time streaming on CoChess and Chess24, and one of my first times just streaming in general. So, if there is anyone in chat who could let me know if this is working and live, that would be really great. Okay, just 2 seconds for me now. I'll be trying to get this all working. Okay, if I'm live and all working, that is brilliant. Okay, so I'll be checking the chat both on my phone and on Twitch and on YouTube throughout. So if you have anything you want to say at any point, just let me know. So today we're going to be going over. Oh, brilliant! Sorry, chat is doing now. Okay, so today we're going to be going over isolated pawns and passed pawns. So the first thing I wanted to start with is isolated pawns. So when we start with isolated pawns, I want to start by defining them. So can anyone think of what an isolated pawn is? If you want to put in chat at any point, let me know. So I'm going to start by showing an example, a really basic example of what an isolated pawn is. Okay, so here we can see the C pawn is isolated. Why the C pawn is isolated is because there's no B pawn and no D pawn. And so it means there's no friendly pawns protecting it. And why is this a problem? So why would this be weak? Well, the reason why it is weak is because it can't be protected by its own. It can't be protected by another pawn then. So it means the pieces are often tied down to protecting it, and black, or black in this case, or the side that doesn't have the isolated pawn can attack it. Yeah, I've just seen someone say, is this on Twitch too? Yes, this is on Code Chess's Twitch if you want to check it out. So I'm going to go over a really good game now that I think will illustrate isolated pawns well, and we'll see if we can have a few takeaways from it. So this game was played by Kazmadzanov and pawns in Vaikonze. And I know you'll be thinking, okay, in this position there is no isolated pawns. So this is a key position from it, and no, there isn't an isolated pawn yet, because at the start of the game you're not just going to arrive and your opponent has an isolated pawn. You're going to have to get there yourself. You're going to have to create an isolated pawn for them. So how do you do that? Well, one way to do it is just to always be on the lookout for when you can cause your opponent to have one. So in this position, black played b5. So what's going on here? Well, let's take a look and analyze it. So as you can see, this tension over here. Material's equal. White hasn't castled yet, but that's probably not a problem. The focus is on the queen side. But the thing I want you to think about is black actually threatening to take on a4. Is this a good move for black? Well, it's probably not a good move for black, because if black takes on a4, next go the queen can take back on a4. And now you'll see black will have two isolated pawns. And having two isolated pawns will be a weakness. So if black actually isn't threatening b takes a4, what can white do? And I want everyone to have a think about this for the moment, because this move is really important. And white here played a really beautiful move. So white played c4. So why is c4 so good? And if we look at it, c4 is so good because they're threatening to take on b5. Yeah, I see someone there got that in chat, c4. Yeah, and so the threat is to take on b5. If black plays something like rook b8, white simply wins a pawn, because takes, 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 and then can take with the bishop or the rook. So you're threatening to win a pawn. So black has to either take on a4 or take on c4. And if black takes on a4, white's going to have this fork. Well, they're going to be attacking here. And well, they're not actually attacking this, but next go, it's going to be very quick to win this a pawn. So black takes on b takes c4. And after bishop takes, and knight takes, we can see that white has gone and created an isolated pawn for black. So that's one of the first things. Creating a weakness for your opponent, because they're not just going to hand one to you. And especially when you're looking for structural weaknesses, look for tension and trades between the pawns and think about how you can play so they get a weakness, so they get an isolated pawn. But okay, you've got the isolated pawn. How do you actually go about exploiting it and taking advantage of it? Well, What can we say about this? When you play at my level, they hand them to you. Maybe they do, but we also know how to get them, so you can get them even more often. So, okay. You've got it now, whether you've played to get it or they've just given it to you, you now have it. What do you do? Well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind that I'm going to show you in this game. And if you keep these in mind when you're playing against them, you'll do really well. The first thing to keep in mind is you want the pieces off the board. Because the less pieces you have on the board, the harder it is for them to defend it, and so the easier it is for you to win. Secondly, you want to target it as much as you can, and especially if it's on... Sorry, the board is a little off screen. Oh, very sorry about that. I will change that now. Oh. Apologies, is that all better? Hope everyone can see that clearly now. Okay. And let me know again at any point if the board ever goes off screen. So after knight takes here, there are two isolated pawns, but the c pawn is going to be easier to attack because it's on a semi-open file. So this is important. If there's an isolated pawn on a semi-open file, put your pieces down against it. And secondly, at all points, trade pieces, especially minor pieces, because it'll be easier to attack. So we'll go through this game and maybe which will hopefully illustrate some of these principles. So it's black's go here, and black played bishop f6, which in my opinion is a mistake. So why bishop f6 is a mistake is it allows a piece trade, which I said is going to benefit white. And this just simplifies the position, making this isolated pawn a bigger advantage. So what could have black done instead? So instead, here black could have played c5, which would probably be preferable. Try to get rid of this pawn. But okay. They play bishop f6. I'm really sorry about this. I am very, very new to streaming, but I hope. Oh my god. Okay. So, keeps moving for me. I'm really sorry. Have this fixed and hopefully I'll get the hang of this. Okay, there we go. Okay, bishop f6. So takes. Starting to trade one of the pieces and takes again. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's a bit nerve-wracking, but okay. So, off we go. White castles. Queen c7. And now white plays a really good move here. So white brings their knight to e5. So, oh, thank you everyone being really supportive. So, why is knight to e5 such a good move? Well, anyone in the chat have any ideas to why knight e5 is strong? Well, firstly, it attacks this pawn, the weak pawn, and next go, the rook is going to move to this semi-open file, and it's going to be a forced win of the pawn. So black needs to do something about it, and the only way black can do something about it is to play knight d7. I don't know why this. Well, I'll keep talking while I try to fix this board. So why is knight d7? So white has forced black into doing another trade of the pieces. So after takes, queen takes, white has achieved their goal. And so the white's goal has been to get off all minor pieces, and through activating their pieces they've done this. But now comes the next bit, the tricky bit. You've created the isolated pawn, you've taken off all their minor pieces, but now you have to win it. Okay, so let's start. Queen c2, nice and simple, attacking the pawn. Now I know they have two isolated pawns, but as we said, the c pawn is the weaker one because it's on the semi-open file, so you start by attacking that. Black gets the file themselves, but by doing this they're taking their eye off the a pawn. So after queen, I'm really sorry. I'm gonna try something else. Give me 2 seconds. We're gonna try do this. I am more than embarrassed and sorry. Technology is really my weak point, and I think now this will have it fixed though, because I've set it up so the board simply cannot move. Okay, we have a board there. Okay. Should all be completely fixed now. So after queen, and let me know in chat if it's not, because I'm not keeping an eye on it. So queen c4, we're attacking the weak a6 pawn. a5 to protect it, and again, queen, queen c4, queen c5 attacking it once more. But now, after queen, c7 defending again, we now need, as white, to get all our pieces on the best squares to attack the 2 weaknesses. You might have heard in chess, you need to attack 2 weaknesses to win. Well, this is very much the situation here. You need to attack the c pawn and the a pawn, because if you attack both, you'll overload black and hopefully win one of them and win the game. So how do you do that? Does anyone have any ideas? Thank you everyone for being in chat, being so kind. How to fix OBS tutorial will be really useful for me right now. So, how are we going to do that? Well, we need our pieces on the best squares. And while the queen is really good here, that square is probably better for the rook, because the queen can go on c3 and attack both of them. But the rook on c3 isn't going to attack both of them. So black does this very clever maneuver of rook b5. Yeah, really well done. So rook c1 is a nice idea, but the rook is better suited on c5 because the queen can then go, because then after this maneuver, we're attacking them both. But I'm just going to go over that again because we need to check here why. Why after rook b5 could the rook not take? And that's very simply because this pawn is now pinned to the queen, and after rook protects, we're going to win the pawn. Okay, so rook b5, rook ah to protect. Now queen c3, and after rook c1, rook c5. So the maneuver to get the pieces into the perfect squares. Black doesn't have much to do. And now finally, as someone said again, rook c1. This is where we want the rook. So yeah, all pieces are now set up perfectly, attacking the weak isolated pawn and the second weakness, which is another isolated pawn. But okay, got all your pieces in their ideal position, but you're not winning any of them. You haven't won a pawn. Well, slowly improve again. h4. Does anyone in chat know why h4 is such a good move? Who's playing this game? It was Kazim Zanov against Valo Pons in Vaikonze in 2009. Sorry, I should have said that. So, reason why h4 is so good is we've set up perfectly on the queen side. Yeah, so it clears the back rank. Set up perfectly on the queen side. So now it's time to improve the king side to the best position possible. h4, h5, and now g3. Black is just shuffling back forward, and king g2. Now, this is a position after queen a7 I want to stop on again and get everyone to think about. Thank you. Black has made a big mistake here. Queen a7. Why have they made a big mistake? Well, now they've left themselves even more susceptible to this pin. And isn't e4 just winning the c-pawn? Well, the problem with e4? e4, d5. Yes, it probably is. But there's a simpler way to do it here. Yeah, rook, someone says rook b, b5. And the thing is, black can't take because you've simply got takes, king h7, and d4. And that's going to be threatening mate. And we can see black's pieces are all the way off, uncoordinated on a7 and a6 because they've been trying to protect, that white has managed to attack the king so brilliantly here. So okay, that's why after rook b5, a pawn it's forced to win a pawn. It can't protect the pawn on a5 anymore. Okay. King h7 was played and takes here. I'm actually not going to go overly through the rest of the game, or I can flip through it quickly if people are interested. But white wins quite straightforwardly here. They force the queens off. And simply bring their king in to win the game pawn up. I want to move on to a different game now. And this game was played versus Korchnoi and Karpov. And so this game is the same idea. We've got isolated pawn, but this one's slightly different, and I'll tell you why. It's slightly different because it's an isolated d-pawn. And isolated d-pawns are slightly more tricky. Does anyone have any ideas why an isolated d-pawn is just a little different? Isn't the rook endgame usually a draw even when you're a pawn up? No, I'll go back to it then if we think it might be a draw. I just wanted to focus on isolated pawns, not the endgame too much. But no, it's not, because and I'll tell you why it's not a draw is because the c-pawn is still weak. So here, black simply brings their king over here, threatening to make a pass pawn with f3, g4, and then h5. So black has to make a different try. So they play e4, e5 to try to create a pass pawn. But then the king just comes brought back over. Okay, so can you please revise the principle of pawn structure, isolated and pass pawns? Yes, that's what I'm going to do. In the next game, I'm going to be doing a lot of revision. I'm going to be saying a lot of things over and over so we get them into our heads. So this game was Karpov versus Korchnoi. And so the principles that we're going to be focusing on here is that an isolated d-pawn is a little better than a regular isolated pawn. And this is because it offers the side with it some attacking chances. They can develop their pieces very fast, and they can go for an attack. So when you're playing against an isolated queen's pawn, the things you need to keep in mind are you want the pieces to swap off fast. Hi, what's my name? Sorry, I'm Alice. So you want your pieces to be swapped off fast, because if you swap the minor pieces off, they can't get their attack. It doesn't work. You need pieces on the board to attack. And secondly, you want to control the d5 square. So actually Karpov is black here. So why do you want to control the d5 square? Well, that will become quite apparent as we look through the game. But to give you a quick preview to say now, is you want to control the d5 square because you want to prevent white from playing d5. White can play d5 helping their attack, or they can play d5 to get rid of their weak pawn. So we'll go through the opening because I'm just going to flick through it here till we get to the key position. This is just a queen's gambit declined. Sorry if I'm going a little fast, I just want to get to this position we can see here. So as we see, white has got the isolated queen's pawn. And now what's black going to do? Well, as I said, black wants to control the d5 square and swap the pieces off. So if you keep these things in mind, all the moves will be very logical and very easy. Where am I from? I'm from Ireland, and I don't have a chess title. So the knight comes to c3, c6, developing a piece, and after castles, this is the point where black plays a really beautiful move. And the really beautiful move here is knight h5. And I want to explain this move. This move is really good for two reasons. First reason is it forces a piece swap. And as we said, it's really important to get the pieces off, because then you are stopping you're preventing chances for white to attack you here as black, and you're also making this weakness an even bigger weakness. And the second reason why it's so good is when white takes, you can recapture with the knight. What did we say? We wanted more control on the d5 square. But a knight on the rim is grim, yes, it is, but this is only short term here. We can bring it back to f6 very soon. So what we want to do here is the knight is coming back, and you might think, well, you're moving your knight backwards, but no, your knight is now covering this d5 square. So you're stopping white pushing d5 and hoping you're getting a knight there too. So white continues. And now black, knight f6, removing the knight off the side of the board, getting it back into the game, and again controlling d5. So after knight e5, sorry, my notation is not my strong point either, bishop d7. So again, another thing people often learn in chess is that bishops are better than knights, so it's not good here to swap the trade, to offer this trade. But what do we think about that? Is knight takes here a good move? I would definitely say no. So that was a really strong knight on e5, and the bishop was doing nothing back here. And as we said before, and I'm going to say again, I'll probably sound like a broken record for this, black really wants to trade pieces. So the knight's not going to take. Queen e2. And now we have a brilliant move by black. Sorry, coming up here. Sorry. Okay, so the brilliant move here, after another trade, is bishop c6. And why bishop c6 is so great is you are once again controlling this d5 square. So what's the theory for an isolated queen's pawn? Yeah, so the side with it tries to attack and keep the pieces on, and the side without it tries to blockade the square on d5 so white can't push, or the side with it can't push. And as well as this, they try to swap pieces off. So bishop c6 controls the d5 square once again, which is why it's such a good move. And so if black simply moves away, the knight can pop in here. So the knight now takes the bishop, and black has got one step closer again to their aim. Black has got another piece off the board. So rook takes, rook c3, queen d6, g3, rook d8, and rook d1. So we can see black has got their pieces off the board. They're still looking at this d5 square, and they're putting their pieces on the semi-open file against the isolated pawn. So they're doing all the right things here. b6, queen e1, queen e2, and rook here. So now, after controlling the square for so long, maybe it's time to get a piece here, or maybe not just yet. So how? Okay, so now they offer the queen trade. They're not yet putting the knight on d4, but they're constantly keeping control of it. Is taking with the queen a good idea for white here? Tactically, what happens? Can anyone see? Well, after simply takes, black has too much pressure on this pawn. Exactly. So after queen c6, white has to move, and now black puts the knight on d5. So black has played really sensibly here. They've swapped their pieces off, they've got the square. Okay, so now queen d2, still defending, and queen b6. So what's threatened by queen b6? Well, the knight is threatening to jump to b4, kicking the rook and then winning the pawn. So now again, white is forced to take. So black has had another success. They've got another piece traded off. Now they take back with the rook. They don't take back with the pawn here, because that will close off their file. And as we said, we want our pieces on the semi-open file against the weakness. So they take back with the rook. Okay. So now again, we've got to a similar sort of endgame as the one before. We've got a weakness. We've got our pieces well placed against it. But that's not winning. We need to find a win. So rook b3, queen c6, queen here. Now this time, white is offering the queen trade. Do we take? No. Taking would simply fix their pawn structure and give a strong file here. And this rook would now be looking down at the b7 pawn. So queen d7, f4, b6, rook b4, b5 to stop the rook coming to c4, controlling the file, a4, takes, queen a3, a5, rook takes a4. So now again, what's going on? Well, it's actually quite similar to the theme last time we looked at in an endgame. Black has got all their pieces in really good positions, looking down on the weakness, and white is uncoordinated. Their pieces are kind of messy because they've been trying so hard to stay active despite having to defend this pawn that all of a sudden we've got this really thematic pin. So as we saw, oh no, I don't know what I did there. We do not want to be taking there. Or don't we? Well, rook takes d4. Instead, probably nothing wrong with rook takes d4. This is frozen on me, my Wi-Fi is. But we want to protect our a5 pawn, because we don't want to be trading a pawn. We don't want to be taking here. Because this will be losing material. These pieces are stopping early, but I think we get the point. So we protect our a5 pawn. And after rook d2, similar to the last game, we take advantage of the pin. So does anyone have any ideas about how we can take advantage of this pin? So e5. So this is a similar theme to as we saw last time. We build up all our pieces, put the strength against it, creating a pin on the semi-open file, and then take advantage of it with e5. After takes, rook takes. What happens if pawn takes? Well, this would be allowing a rook on the 7th rank, and mate would be coming very shortly, with the queen coming down to e2. So instead, queen a1. But now, I have to continue. Queen e8. Threatening e1 check. What's my chess rating? It's around 1900, I think. So, d takes e4. Only way to stop rook e1, picking up the queen. Now rook takes d2. And after rook takes a5, surely black's down material. So black is down a pawn here. But why is this okay? Well, this is okay very simply because white's piece has been so uncoordinated picking up this pawn that black can now finish off the game really nicely. Queen c6, threatening checkmate. After rook a8, queen check, rook b1. Here, white plays a final trick, queen f1, preventing the mate. White is unable to take this rook. Due to the perpetual. But simply, after queen c5 check, king h1, and queen check here, this is winning. And why is it winning? King g1 is forced, followed by rook d1. Oh, thank you so much for all the kind comments. So yeah, this is why it's winning. We win the queen in the end. But what I want you to take away from those two games, the really important thing, is an isolated pawn is a weakness. And to attack the weakness, we want to control the square in front of it to stop them pushing it. We want to swap the minor pieces off to be able to get our maximum force against it. Often put our rooks on the semi-open file, staring down at it. And then in the endgame, put all our pieces on their optimal squares. And yeah, hopefully find a way to break through and win. But okay, enough on isolated pawns. Let's go on to pass pawns. So I'm going to show a simple position here. White is equal on material, but they have a pass pawn. So why is this good for white? Well, basically, the strength behind pass pawns is this one's actually threatening something. It's threatening to queen, which means simply after b5, and the king comes over, the king is tied down, protecting that pawn, so the white king can come over and win these pawns. And this is a really simple, easy win for white. So yeah, as someone said there, push your pass pawns, exactly. We need to push them. And pushing them ties other pieces down, and then you can go and win over here. But okay, again, as I said, never so simple. And some of you might have seen this position before, but it's a really illustrative example on how to create a pass pawn. Because, like with isolated pawns, your opponent isn't just going to hand you one. You firstly need to get one, and then you need to know how to use it. So with isolated pawns, we said when there's big pawn trades, keep thinking of if there's tension in any ways you can go and win it. So, anyone? Yeah, well done. Someone in chat said it. b6. Okay. And after a takes, we'll go with, it works the same either way. We go c6. They take here, their only move. They take here. You simply promote. And you can push through. But okay. What I really like about this example is it shows creative ways to deflect away and to get our pass pawn through. And it also shows the material doesn't even matter that much when pass pawns are on the board. Because when you're about to promote, if you're 3 pawns down, it doesn't matter, or 2 pawns down here, because a queen's going to be so much more valuable. But okay, it's unlikely you're ever going to get that exact position in a real game, but I want to use those principles from that position. So the principles of deflecting other pawns away to create room for your pawns to push through and be passed. And secondly, the idea that material is important, obviously, in chess, but pass pawns can be even more valuable than material. So yes, this was a game in the 2008 Olympiad between Nybak and Magnus Carlsen. And this is the position I want to look at again. And it's quite similar to the last one in some ways when there's a lot of tension on the queen side. So does anyone have any creative ideas of what white can play here to create themselves a pass pawn? It's not an easy position. Okay, so knight takes b5. I like the idea and the creativity, but a better way to go about it is a4. Can we? Yeah, so a4, and after they take, as we can see, similar to the last position, you take here. If they take back, you simply recapture with the knight, and then are going to win this b4 pawn. So they're forced to take the knight, and then knight takes on c6. Okay, so now let's have a look at this. What happens if there's a push on a4? Let's go back to that. What happened? Yeah, so were you saying pushing on a4? That is completely correct. Taking here, and knight takes c6. So now let's look at the position. White sacrificed a whole piece, but it's got the two passed pawns. So this shows the value of the two passed pawns. Black brings the knight back into the game, and queen takes on c3. Bishop back. Rook takes, rook a1. And after knight e5 attacking the queen b2, defending the rook and keeping the queen alive. Rook e1. Okay, and now knight e5. So white has these passed pawns but is a piece down. But what are they threatening? They're very simply threatening to go b6, followed by c6, and it's pretty much impossible to stop them promoting. So here, the knight takes on c5. And Carlsen here, or Black, is saying, you know, I don't mind giving back the material. But yeah, exactly, push your passers. But White's saying, I don't want your material, my passed pawns are more valuable, so they plow on with b6. And after queen b7, they now have queen b5, meaning when they recapture the knight, they don't lose their pawn. And you might be thinking, can't the black rook just go to c8 to defend it? Not really, because after rook a7, queen here, I mean the knight can just take on f7, the knight can come to c6. Not much you can do. No, white is actually not Carlsen, but this game was played back in 2008. And Carlsen lost this. So the rook has to go to a8 to stop the rook coming from a7. And there's a clever tactic here, that after rook takes a8, queen takes, and white recaptures. What can black do? Anyone spot the move? So yeah, it's queen a1 check, picking up the piece. Yeah, everyone's got it there. So queen a1 check. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag on the chat for me, I think. But after g3, let's look again. It's the value of passed pawns. Maybe a piece down, but we can just push on through, and it's unstoppable to promote. So that game, the main thing that I wanted you to focus on there wasn't the pushing of the passed pawns, because even though that was great, it was actually how to create them. It was to look for creative ideas when you know the principle of those 3 versus 3, we looked at the start, and to actually use that in more complicated positions. But what I want to look at now, and the final thing we're going to look at today, is a game between Ivakov and Platonov, players I actually don't know. And this is their position. And I want to show here how to use a passed pawn when it's not just so simple to push them. We can see white has got an advantage here because they've got the passed pawn on d5. Okay, but as you can see, the knight's in the way. And so you can't push it, because there's physically a piece in the way. So, what does white do? Well, white very simply, it's very simple logic this whole game. They want to push their passed pawn, and there's a piece in the way. Knight b5. Removing the piece. Try to check my analysis here. Is this the... Yeah. So knight b5 to remove it. Okay, black is forced to take. Well, they're not forced to take, but they can move their rook and then allow you to take, but it's better to take. So they simply take. And after rook takes back, now all of a sudden you've removed the piece blocking the pawn. So black is now, it's a simple game. White wants to push this pawn, black wants to stop it. What does black play? Knight b7. And we see the idea behind knight b7. The idea is simply to get the knight to d6. Again, to stop it. But okay. And now as white, we have to think. So why is it better to take the knight? Well, if we don't take the knight, allowing takes and rook takes. And okay, now the rook is blockading this pawn. And the rook doesn't really want to be blockading this pawn because the knight is a better piece to blockade the pawn with. And why this is because now this knight here is going to reroute around to h4, f5, and force it to move. So knight takes b5, rook takes, and now black, again there's no piece stopping the d6 push. So the knight comes back to b7. And so now it's white's turn and they're like, okay, the knight's going to come to d6. We don't want that. So, what is white going to do? Anyone have any ideas? So the plan here is actually e4. So can anyone tell me why it's e4? The idea to e4 is not to protect this d5 pawn. The idea for e4 is to control this f5 square. And we want to control the f5 square so we can get the knight there. So yeah, after knight to d6, rook comes back to c3. Now black's move. So yeah, the queen can come to c8. I've actually somehow managed to lose the game. So the notation has disappeared on me. I'm sorry, I'm very new to even chess 24. Try to find the So, okay, I really apologize. I do not have the rest of the game in notation here, but I can tell you the ideas because it's not the actual moves that matter, but simply the ideas instead. So, what is white's plan here? White's plan is simply, thank you so much, is to go knight h4 and knight f5. The king comes to h7, if I can remember correctly. And knight to h4. And queen c8, covering the square of f5. We need to control it again. So queen h5. And so it's really the game is just really, really all about controlling this f5 square to remove the blockader. Rook to d8, queen here, king back, knight to f5. You've eventually got the pawn, the knight to the square you want to get it to, and after takes, 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 and takes, you can see white has achieved their goals. So I hope this is making sense to everyone. So when you have a passed pawn, well, when you're defending against a passed pawn, you want to blockade it, but when you want to play with a passed pawn, you want to push it, so you want to remove the blockader. Now, as I said, I'm really sorry, the moves have just disappeared on me and I don't have the rest of them in here. But I think as a group we can, for the final maybe 5 minutes here, we can come up with a plan and figure out how to win this. And by coming up with this plan, I want to use all the ideas we've had in the session so far, not just about passed pawns, but also about isolated pawns and creating two weaknesses. Okay. So black is going to defend this. Let's push. Can anyone tell me, yeah, a4, a5, I offer drawing these positions, easy done, but as white here you have an advantage, you have to press for it. So a4 is the right idea with a5 threatened. Black will play rook d3. So after a5, the pawn is defended. And then we'll play c8 prophylactically because white's plan is to put the rook on b5. And this again is getting all the pieces on the best squares. And slowly, white is going to put their other rook on b1. And win material. So if the king comes to f7, there's not much black can do here. Rook to b1. And why does this pretty much win material by force? Well, it's quite simple actually. Black is forced to take on a5 because if they protect the pawn, the rook can just take on c5. And have we seen this idea before? I think we have. It's when you've got the weak pawn and you use the pin. So it's all about your rook pinning their pawn to their other rook. So that doesn't work. So they have to take. But okay, what's the best way to play it here? You can simply take back. Another idea, rook a1 is equally good. And maybe after a move like rook b6, taking here. And after takes and takes, this position is very difficult for black to hold. So again, why is it difficult for black to hold? Well, black has too many weaknesses. Their weaknesses are these two isolated pawns and the fact they're also tied down to protect this white pawn from pushing. And so white will simply bring their king in and they're going to win the game. Rook will have to go on c7. Rook a5. The king comes over. This endgame is not difficult. The king can work its way around, eventually come over to b5 and pick the pawns off. And I'm not really here to go through technical endgames with you. I'm sure there are other sessions on that. The stuff I really want to get across was more the principles on how to play with passed pawns and isolated pawns. So we're coming to the end of the hour now, and I just wanted to summarize to make sure everyone's got the clear ideas. and the clear messages, the take-home points I wanted to say today. So the things I wanted everyone to leave here knowing is, firstly, about isolated pawns, is that isolated pawns are weaknesses, and they're weaknesses because they can't be defended by other pawns. And when you're playing against an isolated pawn, you should try to swap the minor pieces off to prevent the side playing against you to have any attacks against you, to have any counterplay. And also, the less pieces on the board, the harder it is to defend the pawn. And then, if the isolated pawn's on a semi-open file, to put your rooks down it and put your pieces looking down on it. And you often might get that thematic pin and be able to take another pawn, as we saw. And then to slowly put the pressure on the pawn, create a second weakness, and hopefully win material. And then in pass pawns, the thing I wanted to point out was that you want to just push them. And as you want to push them, you want to remove all blockades in the way, and then simply get them into an endgame when they have too many weaknesses because they are tied down to your pawn. I hope that all made sense. And the final thing is, obviously, always be on the lookout for how to create pass pawns and to create isolated pawns. So thanks everyone for coming on today, and yeah, this is my first time, a little nervous and not that technologically, not very good at technology, so thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed today's session. If you have any comments or anything, I'll be reading the chat fully afterwards, so yeah, again, thank you and bye.